Hello, and welcome to the Mist Podcast. I'm your host, Aeromist, and I'm going to do a couple of these with and without music, so let me know which you prefer. I personally like music being in the background when I'm listening to someone talk. Different atmosphere, but anyway. So today's topic is going to be someone's mentality existing somewhere. If you could build the spectrum of here's where you're born all the way on the left side, like we're drawing a straight line. On the left is where you're born, the right side is where you die. And you have one dot that just moves along that line from start to finish in a slow manner. But there's a second dot, and that dot is your mentality. It's like your mentality can shift on this one line back and forth at any given time. You could be progressing your mentality to be trying to think about what's happening in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years. And then, as we see with a lot of people dealing with certain aspects of even mental illness or just in general, people's mentality lives a lot behind them. And sometimes even with our mentality living behind us, we tend to get stuck. A lot of people end up getting stuck, especially as they are still physically progressing. And we see it as an example in many, many different areas. To be honest, I'm pretty sure almost any person could probably name off a family member that they have where their mentality just exists somewhere else. And there's a multitude of generations that you could technically take that through, as far as if we're going above me, from to my parents to grandparents to great grandparents. It's like you'll always find those people that progressed, and then you'll always find those people that didn't exactly. And no matter what, because I'm not going to take any aspect of the consideration of people where their mentality does not progress in a sense where I'm not going to take into where people that are neurodivergent or anything of the sort, because that I feel like is an entirely different section, a different world of how you're trying to evaluate, because this goes from more like a day-to-day type of thing. It's something that if we really start looking into the general psychology and mentality of a human individual, then it seems to be a very common thing, regardless of where an individual is setting at developmentally within their mental capacity. So, which it's, even with that being said, anybody can develop their mind, but some people gets, aside from the physical aspects of it, there's a lot of things that kind of end up stunting people and giving them obstacles that they actually never overcome. And I think that just kind of comes with the break of emotional intelligence in generation to generation. And since the ploy of all of that development is set up now, because, a lot of things are not exactly set up for us to receive a sense of progress, as I'm sure many of us, including myself, have got to the point where we realized what was wrong in front of us and grew up in the position where we had to learn not by what was right and being taught in the better direction, but to be able to go the opposite direction of what is in front of us and how people are and what they're providing, and being able to build off of that to say, this is what I don't want to do, and this is how I would rather build my mentality. And because whenever we get to this particular point in time where you have more of a centralized control, there's things within your previous experience, your perspective on reality is already remotely fixed in a sense in certain aspects because of how long you've already been here. So at that point, it becomes in the temperament of a person's control, in a lot of ways anyway, on what they're taking in. And we've taken in so much right now at this point as a process that we have to unravel certain things, certain idealisms, certain prospects. And I feel like in almost every generation in an essence is having to deal with the exact same thing. What they were never provided from what was above them. And that, we could say that there's definitely a trail of things that were there, but in this specific case, especially with people's mentality existing in different places, I think that this becomes the most prevalent thing as to why we end up getting held back. And it really plays a massive part into where emotional intelligence begins to break from individual to a grand scale of even helping people conquer the mind. So, and I'm gonna give a little story about something that doesn't necessarily have credibility, but the way it fits with some of this, it makes a lot of sense even at that. So I knew a guy that did some DMT, and his experience was he was back in elementary school, like back in the room, in an old elementary school room, and everyone was there, but they weren't in their children bodies. They were in their adult bodies, acting the same way, doing the exact same things, playing out a day as if they were still technically in that exact same time, but they were in their current physical bodies. And hearing that story, it really sets with me, because I'm like, that's just, it holds so much with my own experience with psychedelics anyway. It holds a lot of merit to put things together to say that, wow, people really do end up getting stuck. And whenever we talk about the progression of helping conquer the mind, comes with conquering the mind where it was at different time periods, because realistically, that's all you're actually doing to overcome an obstacle. To overcome trauma, you are trying to overcome the obstacle of your mentality that existed in a particular time period. And the only way that you're going to keep the mentality moving forward is to be able to find your peace or comfort, whatever it is in that area, and then you move forward. So if we're looking at that scale, you could also do the exact opposite. It's like, and don't take this as a practical thing, but this is more just on the spot type of like contemporary evaluation to say, you could almost say that there's a spectrum even with that, to say how mental illness trails along, right? It's like, at least if we'll say depression and anxiety, just more than anything else, right? It's like two lines on top of each other, and these two lines can like go stretch themselves in either direction towards whichever place that your mentality is existing. And now that I even think about it in my own case, it's like my anxiety exists. I conquered my previous anxiety from the anxiety from the past. So it's like, if there's this massive line, I've overall conquered a lot of aspects of my anxiety in general. But if we're taking the whole line, like we'll say that there's still the bottom line of, death to birth and all of that. Then you have the line above of depression, and you have the line above of anxiety. But the two lines above actually shorten themselves in length, and they maneuver on top of your time period of mental existence. Because this doesn't really pertain to the physical. So we'll say that those lines are also the same color as the dot from your mentality. And so if I put that bar over and I reference my own anxiety, then that bar would be cut off to the point of my current physical self. But some of my anxieties that do pop up now are more about the future. And so that bar would sit on the rest of end of that, to say that is where my anxiety lives. But more of my and aspects of my depression, in a sense of certain negative aspects of my own mentality, still exist over in that side, but there's still some aspects that like lean into certain previous points. And you could almost, and to throw another twist in this, you could say that that line could be thin or thick. And like I've thinned out that depression line very thin, and I've thinned out that anxiety line, but it's more just where they exist and slowly bringing them back to the point where it disappears. Now, this is only me putting together the scale of trying to represent, of saying where, and even in my own experience, and I feel like this could be applicable to any person if they're really evaluating the source root of what they're feeling and why their emotions are existing in a current position in time, because there's obviously being upset and sad about things in the moment or whatever. But if we're looking at how the person's mentality progresses existing in different areas and what ties you back to these particular time periods or ties you into the forwardness of the time periods that are in front of you, then you start drawing this really long board, or this really long web from you to other points in time. And I feel like any person could really sit there and do that. And will it hold as much merit in a sense? I feel like it should, because if we're also keeping the aspect of conquering the mind, then that technically is what that comes with, right? Because you start conquering the previous and the aspects of trauma that make your emotions be tied to what exists behind you, where the mentality is. Then, as anything with the mind is conquerable and evolvable, then you should be able to, at some point, shorten the bar from it existing at this point in time, and then you no longer are tied to that. The bar gets removed or slowly starts getting smaller, and you start bringing that bar closer towards your current period in time, as far as, still referencing the way that would be set up. And I hope that wasn't a little too difficult to visually put together, because I didn't actually physically put it together. It's just more of like, anyway. But and to say this, I've noticed a lot of times, it seems to happen with us, but also people that are older. I see a lot of older people end up experiencing this. Like my grandpa, his mentality is still in the 60s and 70s. He will still call people of color not so good words. And not necessarily full derogatory, but he still calls marijuana dope. Just so it's like the time reference, and it's like this, and there's certain aspects of his mentality that have caught up to daily life, but there's so many aspects of his own mentality. So if we're going to, actually, I have a piece of paper here, so I'm going to do this. So if at the top I draw a circle, right? And we're just going to say that that's your present time. We're not talking about the future, but we'll just talk about the past, right? And we create that dot all the way to another dot, and you start putting life events in between this line, right? His mentality exists here, but you could start drawing another line through there that's on top of that to say that, okay, this point, and then huddle over towards this point. That's where his mentality is still existing. And you could even do that as time periods, not necessarily events, right? And people are trailing a lot of times in, it kind of goes back with being honest with yourself. Like, you have to really be honest with yourself to get the practicality of all this. Like, and it's different whenever you're dealing with the current mind, because I feel like once you condense everything down to the moment, there becomes a lot more conducive and decisive things to progress and put together, as far as how you're building the perspective centralized reflection of the mentality to bring it back into, and remember, awareness in these other areas is like important still. Like they should still have a thinned out grade line almost to them. Like, you shouldn't be completely cut off, but your emotional ties to these other areas outside from the past and the future should be more grayed out to where you're aware of them, but you aren't tying yourself to them to where they affect you emotionally. Because anything from the past is supposed to be an opportunity for growth, and anything in front of you is supposed to help you put together more chances for learning, but also being able, since you have these experiences behind you, it sets you up. And that's kind of what creates certain people's anxiety, is like being afraid or postulating over futuristic things. And it's like, once you don't emotionally tie yourself to things that aren't in your control, and you're more just like, okay, I got this set out, but if it doesn't work like that, then I'm not going to be upset about it, or those kinds of things, whatever puts you as an individual in a position where you're anxious or worried about what's in front of you or the future. It's like, I feel like that almost goes into a whole different topic in a sense of like finding your centralized peace. And but I feel like you get closer to that by this being a bump in the road. And if we're going towards the mind not conquered all the way to the mind being conquered, and there's roadblocks in there, this is just one of them. Your mentality existing in another place. And so, with all that as a reflection, I think you as the individual listening to this should ask yourself, does my mentality still exist in another place? And we mean more in the process that your mind, mentality, process, or anything of the sort has not evolved from a particular place in time, right? It's like if I'm trying to explain to an old person how the world works today, some will get it, but a lot of them can't grasp even the concept of some aspects of how our world works now, because and even if you tell them it does, they want to be blissfully ignorant enough to say that it doesn't work like that. And they still think it does because mentally they're like, nah, this is how it works. Sometimes a lot of people are not going to end up unraveling the ingrained realm of their process. Your brain is like a computer. And there's other things that it takes into consideration for the whole way that it's put together, as far as like chemicals and other things. But I feel like if you bring that down to the base, because your genetic code is even code, your DNA is literally code. So you start breaking that down, it gets to the point where, yes, this is nothing but a process, and unraveling the entire thing to dive into it is something most people not only don't have the capacity to, but people aren't given the tools to do that. So it leaves so many people at that roadblock, and you never really know when people are going to get there. And sometimes we do have our own roadblocks, but back to the original thing is that you have to ask yourself if your mentality is existing in a particular point in time. And if it is, then you have to conquer where your mentality is sitting. So behind you, I talked about this in the first episode, which I definitely recommend you go watch that. Gives a better breakdown of kind of how to do this as far as like what to say to yourself. It's about talking to yourself. But in this particular case would be, you have to bring the previous you into that room and have that conversation. Because if you're sitting at the round table, you could fill all the seats at that massive round table with you and then the other realms of your perspective consciousness that are building the perspective that you have. So we talk about thoughts being seeds that are planted as trees. Well, let's say that instead those seeds were actually the conception of you as a whole in a particular period, and then that just became a copied version of you that just exists in your mentality. And then you're at the round table with all of yous, which includes, you're in the middle. The left side is nothing but people or the previous use from, time periods. And this could be long time periods where you had large amounts of growth. It could be particular settings in one instance. It could be a lot of different aspects. So I think this is that's something you have to pertain to yourself. But then everything in front of you could be oneself, but the convolution of all of the thoughts and the presence of everything that you are emotionally attaching yourself to, that is keeping your mentality to like pull you forward. And so that pulling forward without the emotional detachment is keeping you attached to these ideas of what if, or the process of overthinking. And then you're getting lost in there. Like you have to find your way back to current self. Awareness is obviously really important, but you need to have the awareness of the baseline before you start trying to settle yourself over the awareness of fucking every goddamn possible thing else. Especially if you are a concrete overthinker of someone who is expansive on their own thinking. And it's not just you overthinking about some of the simple things, but some of those people that are plagued by postulating how shitty the world is, or other things that are very, very out of their control, but because they're so endowed in the way that they're thinking about these things that they're just lost, absolutely going in circles. And that could also be said about the previous self, is that that's all it is the previous you walking in a constant circle, and you have to pull yourself out of that circle and bring yourself back to base, back to the centralized point of the temple and the current self. And if you don't, then you'll walk in circles forever, because the mentality, with it being a processes could work like that. You could be stuck in that remote cycle mentally, and you have to find a way. And with this as the platform to set up for finding that way, you have to break yourself out of those mentalities. And it could be, and certain aspects of it I know are less or more applicable to other people. Like, not every person is processing, every single detail of all of the certain things. Like, you kind of just have to try to take it at a baseline and apply it to yourself if you're going to. And I think even with that, like, what I want to do more than anything with this podcast is like make people think. I want you to think, and for the better of yourself more than anything else. Like really sit there with yourself, because the only way to get anywhere with your mentality is sitting by yourself with those thoughts. And this will definitely be another topic to cover at some point. But you take in the prospect of conquering all of the brain. Where was I going with this? I lost it. Fuck. Damn, I was hoping I wouldn't fuck up on this. Listen, I don't have notes, okay? I lost where I was going. I wish I could just go in and rewind, but I'm not going to edit this out. So, but, fuck, I'm so mad I forgot what I was trying to say. Oh yeah, fuck. It doesn't matter. Okay. I'll come back on topic. Okay, so long pause. I'm angry, and I'm trying so hard to bring it back because I know where I was going to go with it. Okay, come back on topic. Anyway, so if you're going to attempt to roam the realms, that's what it was. If you're going to attempt to roam the realms to conquer the mind, then you're going to have to be alone, and you're going to have to sit with yourself. Nobody else, and this is definitely a topic for another video, nobody else is ever going to fully understand your mentality. And with you also not taking the deep dive to understand yourself enough to know what's going on, you're never going to be able to relay that to anybody else. And I know some people aren't exactly good with words, but at the same time, if you're going to give an I don't know to yourself, then you're going to give an I don't know to somebody else. So you have to start somewhere with yourself before you start progressively opening up the mind enough to know what's going on. And I think that saves a lot of people, even in essence, from exerting certain subconscious toxicity that people don't realize they're exerting, sometimes to other people, but a lot of times for themselves. And I think I'm gonna go over that entire thing in a whole different video. Maybe just, I don't know. I'm still trying to decide if I'm gonna do these long or what I'm gonna do. Because honestly, there's so many of these topics that tie into each other, and I feel like I could sit here and do a 3-hour thing to dissect them all. But if I just sat here and did that, then I would end up wanting to make like another video, but I want to cover certain things specifically to cover all of the perspectives on them as far as I can. Also, if you guys have any suggestions, leave them down below. I'd really appreciate it. I have some things already set up, but I also want to do this because I want to be able to provide something for other people to give them some amount of progress with their own mind and their own mentality. So just to give a little bit of a recap, evaluate yourself, evaluate things, but understand your emotional attachment to places of your own mentality and how that's affecting you. And also how that transfers over to your interactions with other people, because a lot of times the things that you've been through play off of the exact same thing. I'll just get into this here because, to be honest, it's a whole ass other topic that I was going to do for a different video. But where is it? Subconscious self-destruction. So because with self-conscious self-destruction, which a lot of people don't even realize they're doing, to be honest, it's probably better I put it in here because there's not a lot to progress on with it in certain aspects. But you know, since our perspective is built upon our experiences and without having conquered any of the realms that we've talked about with the mentality existing in previous places, then that means your development of your self-worth is built upon how other people usually have set you out to view yourself. And this is also based off of experiences. That's why people end up caring about fucking things that don't matter, especially other people's opinions or whatever the fuck it is. And that even comes from like school. A lot of that comes from certain social settings that we end up getting put through that are actually really toxic for us and people don't talk about. And that just ends up creating, you know, another break of emotional intelligence that ends up coming down to the parents that was never passed down to them. And, you know, there's a big constant energetic crossover from these other people to you, from your parents to you, to all this other stuff. And with you having a lack of your own self-worth and self-value, it subconsciously implants you succumbing yourself constantly to what you feel like you deserve. Even if you are technically not trying to do that, you have to ask yourself if you actually are, because it's like, a lot of people want to sit here and tell me I don't know, or say they don't know. Like you always fucking know. You just don't want to be honest with yourself that you know, because you either don't want to change, or which that does the case for some people, but for a lot of people it's the other side of it where they feel like that's just what they deserve, even if they know it's not good for them. And so they dumb themselves down in a sense, quote unquote, to start being like, all right, these people are shitty for me, but I think I'll keep them around because I just don't want to be alone, or they're trying to fixate other aspects of their own life. Okay. Hold on. Texting my mom back. Fuck, that made me lose my train of thought. I really gotta not look at my phone while I do this. Where was I at? Fucking hell. I guess it's a little authentic to do it like this. Whatever. I don't care. I'll keep it like that. We all lose our train of thought. We were on self-destruction. Yeah. Okay. So we end up surrounding ourselves by people that aren't good for us. Even though we know they're not good for us, we put up with it because we feel like that's what we deserve. And so that's a lot of times that comes with people putting up with shit before that they know that they didn't deserve. But everything else at a subconscious level has done them down to that in an entire realm, and that's where they exist in. And that just ties back into your mentality needing to be approached from a previous area in time that you have to conquer, and then you pull that back to that particular point of today or whatever it is, and bring around the essence of supply for valuing yourself to change what's around you. If you're inducing substances, and this isn't even like illegal substances or drugs or whatever, it could be food, it could be anything you drink, because most of the shit out there just ain't good for you. And we'll do a video on that. I'm gonna do a video on the whole aspect of the world being dog shit, and we'll go over that very soon. Hopefully I don't say too much. I'll put it like that. But we're definitely gonna go over some of the bullshit. And it's like people will go drink Red Bull, or they'll go drink energy drinks, or they'll go eat a bunch of food knowing they're gonna feel like shit afterwards or whatever. And it's just like, it's like we know what is good for us, but we're dumbing ourselves down to, and sometimes it's not just because of value and self-value. I feel like 60 to 70% of it is, but then a lot of other times it's like learned processing habits and running away from pain. But I guess technically if you're trying to numb or run away at the same time, then you're going to tie that back to the exact same realm of you valuing yourself, because if you valued yourself more at that point, you wouldn't be succumbing yourself to have to feel any amount of numbness to get away from that other previous point. So it ends up being a very, very distinct connection between all of this. And And that's why talking about some of these topics could be a little bit difficult to try to tackle an area and get all the perspectives of it down and then not go into another one, because I probably could sit here and do fucking 8-hour podcast every fucking day and just sit here and talk and talk and talk and try to take in literally every single aspect of something to be able to get across not just what I'm trying to say, but help people maybe see something that they haven't seen that they need to see out of something that they know of, whatever it might be. So, and well, but it's like, then how do we get away from that? Well, I feel like no matter what you do, you're going to have to conquer that previous line behind you of all your past and your past experiences and all of that other good stuff. But at the same time, I feel like you're also going to have to implement what needs to be implemented into your current day, because the only person that can implement change for your current self is you in your current self, no matter what you do. The person wanting to conquer the previous mindset has to come from the current mindset to say, I am tired of my mental existence being in this place. And that web could be multiple places. You could be tied. You could have one center point and then just be tied in on a big fucking web left to right from past to future and have all of that interconnect in a million different ways. And so it's like, you know, if you want to get this process of getting to a central point of at least being able to enjoy existence or make existence more, I would say more enjoyable in that sense, but also just tolerable, manageable, depending on who you are. This, because I feel like even something like this could work for someone that is a narcissist, or has that really negative perpetual view, because if we're taking the perpetual view of it all, then you also have to take into consideration that the opposite end of the negative way that you're thinking also stems from a particular place. And although you've built off of that, you still are trying, you still, like, I feel like nobody wants to just hate existing. Like, and like, although a lot of things set us up for all that, we end up hating what's around us. And a lot of times because of self-value, and not understanding how to mitigate evaluation of what's around us and what we've been through. And, you know, once again, those are chips away at aspects of emotional intelligence that people aren't taught. And with how any individual can progress, then, you know, anyone could take a break away from something and develop their mind in a million different ways, which is why we have all of these prospectual aspects of psychology. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a licensed anything, but I'm just someone that thinks and has thought through a shit ton of stuff. And with being involved in music and writing and speaking and words, I also just know how to articulate a lot of what's going on up here. And I've had to do it on my own, so I guess in a sense that gives me the edge, but I want to be able to give people the layout to progress on that, because we want to build bonds with people. We want to be interconnected with people. We want to be close with people. That not only do you have to be able to evaluate yourself and other people, but you have to be communicative of what is going on with yourself to another person. How are you going to build the bond if you're not throwing strings to them? If you're not letting this bridge build upon itself, because you're not giving what you should be able to give for those things to build. And sometimes that's just comes with you having to build aspects of yourself up so that you can start connecting the bridge with this other person. So as a double side to this, which I'm actually am going to get into that in another video, is, you know, evaluate the people around you, your friendships, relationships, family, whoever it is. Evaluate people so you know what to cut off, what isn't good for you, what is good for you, and to be able to call people out. Be communicative on what you will or will not tolerate and what you don't want to fucking put up with, right? That ties right back into the aspect of self-value. And I feel like I could dive back into the aspect of self-worth even more. But I'm going to try to keep all of these probably under anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. I have to go help my mom right now because she just had surgery. So I'm going to probably cover some of those topics in another video. But does your mentality exist in other places? All the time. We spend most of our existence with our mentality existing in other places. But those places are conquerable. Just like the realm of the entire layout of your own mental capacity has a layout to it. And some of those places are dark, some of those places are walled off, some of those places are completely bridged off. And the only way to start helping the computer, the mind, AI, work the way you want it to and actually make progress to evolve, etc., is by finding ways to bridge these connections that or overcoming these obstacles even that are there, and to shine light across the entire thing and get to a point of inner peace and happiness, whatever that is definable to a person. But no matter what, we're all trying to get there. And love definitely goes in there too. We're all kind of, we all want to be loved. It's like the unconditional thing. A lot of us, even though we weren't given it, we still try to give it to other people. Even though people a lot of times don't deserve it. And I could go on a whole ass trail with that. But understand what your goals are and work towards them. Whether that's just peace or happiness. I feel like that should be over everything. Like literally over everything. It should be at the top. And if it's not for you, you should ask yourself what your other goals are. And if they're going, because think about this. The goals that you're making in other areas are trying to lead you to what? Happiness, peace, or we technically would call stability peace. And that would categorize underneath that, I feel like, because that's where you would essentially be peaceful, is when you are stable. But that isn't always a requirement, right? See, everyone's definition for that is going to be different. But I feel like we all want to get to what we would mentally, in our own capacity as individuals, describe as peace or happiness. So, good luck. I believe in you. You can do this. Drop your suggestions for topics down in the comments. If I should edit out those times where I went blank-minded, I picked back up on them. Took me a minute. And yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I will see you next time on The Mist. Okay.